Welcome to my June 2022 webinar. This one's called Navigating Change, and I subtitled it Frozen 2, Nothing Stays the Same, so hold on tight. Being a little facetious about that title, but we'll see how it plays out. This month's webinar is about embracing change without anxiety. And that's not always an easy thing to do. Everything is changing all the time. Marshy once commented, maybe more than once commented, that the only constant in the universe is change. I put a bunch of questions at the beginning of the invitation. I'm just going to go over those now very quickly and then get down to what I really mean about everything is changing. So I asked them as questions. Do you lose sleep over changes taking place in your life? Does political strife repulse you? Political strife refers to the changes that are involved in, different positions, being put forth and argued. Do you feel insecure because of random gun violence? And the implication of that is that, gun violence changes our lives. It may, even when it happens in another place in the world, we find ourselves having to perhaps adjust our routines and the way we take care of ourselves. And we probably also look over our shoulders a little bit more. Does inflation worry you? Does it mean, those of us who are a little older, maybe living on relatively fixed incomes, and inflation tends to make our money not go as far. Do world events, war, famine, natural disasters upset you? Things that are perhaps remote from your life, my life, our lives, but which nevertheless have impacts, both economic here and the availability of products, but also just the turmoil of war and what that means. Are you afraid that you'll lose your health and well-being? Does the COVID pandemic scare you? Obviously, we worry about COVID, but getting COVID means, well, we have to go through a change in a period of sickness, and that could even result in a hospitalization. But there's also, the things that we have to do differently to protect ourselves in a time of pandemic. Does climate change disturb your sense of safety? Climate change is change in a big way. And on an individual level, there's not a lot we can do about it, but we have to suffer through it with heat, and certainly here in Iowa this week, seeing temperatures in the upper 90s, a little unusual for mid-June. That usually doesn't happen until July or even August. So yeah, it's hot and it's early in the summer season. Do you shrink from the inevitability of death and taxes? I put that one in kind of facetiously, but it is said that the only two things guaranteed in life are death and taxes. But there is an inevitability to that, but it also puts pressure on us and can be stressful and require us to make changes in our lifestyle to, deal with our, lifespan and, certainly, the requirements that we have financially in taxes and many other things. Do you become anxious when you have to change jobs, move to a new home, suffer a financial setback, or spend a lot of money? These are big ones, of course, and these relate more directly to the kinds of changes in our life that can really be very stressful. And, we don't handle the change very well. Often people drag their feet, they're kind of procrastinating about making the changes, particularly about changing a job, where you find perhaps you're not happy with the job that you have. but something inside you doesn't want to or isn't willing to allow you to find a new job that you might like better. I had to counsel someone just this week about sitting down and making a list of the things you'd want in your ideal job. And then you have to go through the reality check that no ideal job, even the most ideal of jobs, is completely free of certain just mundane and routine kind of work that has to be done. And so one has to make adaptation to one's job situation. In other words, it isn't always the job, it's how we're reacting to it or to the environment. And even maybe, dealing with coworkers can be, or bosses. Or if you're the boss, then, you're the people who work for you. Just dealing with them, can be very, very challenging. And so making a change as a boss, you might have to fire somebody or move them to another position so that they would, one, be more efficient, and two, cause less problem in the office. I don't have a lot of, quote, job experience, but I have enough to know that there's almost always somebody or some part of the situation which you wish would change. And you're not always in a position to have much effect on that. So the basic question is, do you feel insecure in an ever-changing world? Does the prospect of change itself disturb your life, disturb the quality of your well-being? It's hard to navigate in the world today. Underlying everything, all this change going on, it seems to have accelerated. And that's largely due to technology. The pace of life has increased to a frantic point. And even people who handle it well are still challenged, so to speak, to keep up with everything that they have to do. But change is inevitable. And so adaptation is an essential skill, if you will, to navigate all of the change that we're facing. So change is inevitable, but there's also a sense of danger in so much of what's going on in the world today. And that danger brings a fear. And of course, the fundamental thing about that fear is that something bad's going to happen to us. And so there's going to be a change in our status, in our happiness, in our well-being. So change is inevitable. And it's really only natural that change brings a certain level of anxiety and a sense of insecurity. And some people have a very hard time with change. There are certain people who we call on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, for whom any change, even a slight change in daily routine, can be very upsetting. And, so that's kind of an extreme example. But lots of people who just basically have anxiety have a very hard time with even fairly small changes in their life. Even, like they're going to take a trip and they're worried about whether or not the weather is going to, facilitate or interfere with their trip. And so, there's that kind of change that comes, and often not entirely predictable, can produce a lot of disturbance in how safe we feel. Now, I got to start that sentence over. I used to often use a movie as an example of something that I wanted to talk about in a webinar. And so I didn't use the name of the movie or the idea of the movie in the title. Well, sort of in the subtitle I did, but there's basically a children's movie, Frozen 1 and Frozen 2. There might be a Frozen 3, but I haven't seen it. Frozen 2 is, I think, the better of the two movies. It's really quite well done, and the animation is spectacular. And there's a song in it which basically says that nothing stays the same, so I hold on tight to you, because the relationship provides stability. And that's not a bad idea. It could be very good, but we all know that relationships change over time. And sometimes they ripen and mature and become more gratifying, but oftentimes the luster wears off. We get perhaps tired of the idiosyncrasies of someone, whether it be an intimate relationship or even something more just on the level of a friendship. And so, like we step away a little bit. And so even that kind of a relationship quality can change. So even though the movie says, hold on tight, I'm holding on tight to you, I think is the line, that we can't count on that forever. It's going to change. The nature of the relationship will change. Somebody might move away, somebody might die, somebody might get sick, somebody might get married, and that's a famous way of changing other relationships that we have. I can't tell you how many, even in The Lion King, just thinking of movies here, particularly children's movies. I watch a lot of children's movies these days because I babysit my granddaughter. In The Lion King, there's that wonderful song that I believe it's the ape and I can't remember what the other animal is, jackal or something. And, and they lament that Simba is the lion, the young lion is falling in love. And what they say called the threesome will be down to two. So even relationships in that sense will change just because of our circumstance changing. Oh, so much change in the world, so much change in the world. Let's get right into how we deal with change, successfully navigate change. I like that word, navigating change. Change is happening. So how do we manage that? How do we deal with it? How do we navigate through all the changes that are taking place? I think the best way to say that is that we can either rise above it or transcend it. Rising above it means being able to watch the changes taking place and navigating them smoothly, and without anxiety, so that we feel good and we don't lose our sense of well-being in the face of change. I've watched refugees from the Middle East and Africa. Now, I can't think of the name of the country where the war is going on in Europe, Ukraine. Now from Ukraine, millions of people, fleeing for safety, mostly the women and children, with the men staying back, and some of the women to fight. So there is that sense of rising above a thing, and sometimes it's just based on a kind of heroism that the collective body has, in this case the Ukrainians have, where they're just not going to submit to Russian domination. And so, they're fighting tooth and nail and trying to get lots of support, which most of us agree they deserve, because it is their country and they're being invaded by a neighboring country. And that's, we don't think that's right. So, and not everybody feels that way, but, just saying that we have that kind of rising above a situation. And there are skills involved in doing that are well worth cultivating. The ability to step back and see what's going on and accept the fact that it's happening, rather than, in some sense, denying it or wishing it were different and that sort of thing. It's just saying, okay, this change has occurred. You know, I've had to change jobs. I've had to move. I have to accept a changing relationship that's meaningful to me. All these different things that involve change that can get to us, can cause stress. They don't have to cause stress. So we can rise above much of that change by acknowledging something inside me is anxious about the changes taking place in my life. And just being with that, just really acknowledging that it's there instead of immediately trying to push it aside. Oh, I can get through this. You know, I have to get through this. I'm going to get through this. So we can take that kind of a position, but that's kind of wishful thinking. Whereas when we really sit with something that's giving us some challenge, some feeling that makes us insecure, or the feeling of insecurity, then we can watch that taking place and let it happen and make the necessary changes, which we call adaptation, in order to keep our own equilibrium. But the other way of dealing with it is to transcend it. So we can rise above it and go up, or we can transcend it and go down. And where do we go when we transcend? Fortunately, I think all of us who are attending here, and I hope any audience that tunes in to the video replay has that sense of what transcending means, to go beyond. Transcending means to go beyond, but in that sense of going to that level of life that underlies all of the change and from where all that change comes from. And knowing, and from experience, that that level of life is steady, and we could even say blissful, that there's a joy or a happiness that is part and parcel of that experience. And so we can navigate the change. We can have our attention within the material universe and still open our awareness to a level of existence that does not feel like it changes. That does not mean that level is not dynamic within its own nature, but it doesn't bring that kind of, doesn't suffer that kind of change, that it brings a steadiness to it, a non-changing, we say basis of the field. And so developing those skills, the skill of transcending and the skill of rising above and just being a witness to what's going on in our lives with acceptance, can help us enormously to deal with any situation that comes up. And the transcending is a great way of just relieving the stress of change, and doing that regularly each day. And if you're doing transcendental meditation twice a day, makes us able to navigate through all the stuff that's going on in our life, and to be very dynamic in our lives, to be able to respond to things with vitality and clarity, while being steady inside. So we can rise above, or we can transcend. So I think that's all I need to say about navigating change. What I'd really like to do is to get down to our group clearing session and actually work with everyone. And I usually work with people individually while doing that, to deal with some situation that is currently perhaps causing some stress. or even if it just means going back to something that's happened previously, and just checking in to see if there's any buried stress that we're still carrying, post-traumatic stress. It may not have been a traumatic event. So I'm going to leave off here. I've put in the chat, please, if there are any questions or comments you want to make at this point. Otherwise, I'm going to end the recording, and this recording will be up on my YouTube channel along with all the others, and there are a lot of them. I once thought of writing a book, and now I actually have probably more than enough material. If I just transcribed and edited all these lectures that I've done, it would be quite a thick book. Don't know if that'll ever happen. I wanted to do it for a while, and then I kind of went like, why do I want to spend all that time doing that? What do I get out of it? You know, what was the value for me? So I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat, so I'm going to sign off here, and hope that everyone who watches this, remembers that they can rise above and transcend all the challenges that they're facing, all the changes that they're facing in their life.